Requesting connection. Established. Encrypted. We're live. The show you've been asking for. Advice, technology, and community. Linux first, all others second. This is Ask Noah.
Live from Altispeed Technologies, the Ask Noah show starts right now. This is the show where we came to do all the things on Linux they said couldn't be done and take your questions on how to do the same. The phone lines are open this hour to be a part of the program. It is a free call, 1-855-450-NOAH. That's 1-855-450-6624, or send an email to live@asknoahshow.com. My name is Noah Chalai. I am your host. Delighted to be here with you as another episode of the Ask Noah show kicks off this hour. Joining me, my co-host, Mr. Steve Ovens. Welcome in, sir.
Good evening, Noah. So you know how when something is sticky?
Oh, my.
You know when you get a bug report. So we are just about to go live, and I get a... and I was like, uh-oh. I look over, and it's someone furiously typing. I won't say who. NT is slow.
Oh,
well,
no.
At least we know that we're using it. No, it's fine. It was something simple. It was a small thing, but that's how you know something's sticky.
Yes. Where it hangs in. Here's the thing. You and I, it sounds like we are having somewhat similar days. I got cast into an interesting role in which a friend of mine's kid bought a, it's not really an e-bike. It's really more accurately described as an electric, dirt bike is the best way that I would think to describe it. And long story longer, there's an issue with it. And so reached out to the company, went back and forth, support this, that, and the other. And in the end, they sent a USB serial device along with a proprietary cable to plug into the brain. And so I spent my afternoon learning how to flash firmware onto an electric dirt bike and then running into a brick road and not being able to continue. But as it relates to your thing, people knocking on the door or coming to you and asking for help there's a privilege associated with that, right? Like, this thing isn't working, and I know that on the other side of this door is a Steve Ovens, and I know that if I can just bring the problem to his attention, there will be a fix. It's just a matter of getting it to his attention and getting the time. Hopefully I can get him before he starts that little radio show he does.
You know what? I'm happy to feel those things genuinely, right? Lots of people say, you've also asked me privately about what the divide is between providing a service and the stress that
yes.
comes with having a service go down or whatever. And yeah, it can be a little bit challenging at times, but I'm genuinely happy to get those sorts of things because it means that the thing that I'm doing, I am validated, Noah. Mm-hmm. Someone has validated the thing that I am doing as worthwhile.
No, I 100% agree with you. It's just there is absolutely something to be said about, hey, this thing that I'm doing is, as you put, sticky or valid or used and that sort of thing. I was actually having a discussion with we'll call him a person in a position to make technology decisions for an organization. And so we were going through some ideas that I had and how I thought we would best leverage it. And it came up, and basically the question to me was, what's the approach to introduce new technology and how do you make it sticky? And my answer back to him was, you can't. There's nothing that you can do to get people to decide that this is the thing that sticks and that's the thing that doesn't. And so basically what you got to do is you got to put the boats in the water and you got to float them and you got to see what boats people get into. And then you got to pour gasoline into those boats to make them to empower them and to make the experience awesome. And you got to be willing to, the boats that nobody gets into, you got to be willing to let them drift off or sink. And that can be frustrating because people don't always get into the boats that we want. We had a good long discussion about but these boats are better, and these boats do it better, and these boats have these features, and these boats have this functionality, and those boats don't. It's like, well, but in the end, if we're going to choose those, you got a choice between we're pouring all the gas and resources into these things over here, and everybody wants to use those things over there. And so I might leave it at an open-ended, if you know of a better way.
This is one of those things, like you said, the boat that you want people to be in.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted, like all of my nerd friends who are running Image, I wanted Image to be the thing.
Mm-hmm.
It just so was not the thing. Like, she'll walk into the office with her phone and have images from Auntie that she will just be like, you need to, like, hey, look at this. Do you remember this, or whatever? Or she shares them with me because whatever, the share link is easy. All of those sorts of things. I know image fans. I know you can do a bunch of that sort of stuff, but the real world data is in here. Like, I wanted her to be on image. She didn't take to it. I had to abandon that boat. That's just all there was to it.
Is there any, like, why do you think the delta between, like, the thing the thing that has stuck out to me from the beginning of this, we'll call it adventure, is the guy who wrote Image wrote it for his wife. So, like, the target audience is not really other nerds. The target audience is the wife of a software developer who just wants a simple thing to manage her photos. Where do you think the delta was introduced or came in?
Well, I would say that if you just objectively look at how Image presents things, it may have started for a normie, but that's definitely not what you get, right? When you click the share button and it's like, well, what's my external link? And like, you get all of these things. When she gets a share button on Enti, it just pops up and says, which one of these people do you want to share it with? Right? Like, you can dig under Enti's hood and do those sorts of things and set up like an external URL and all that sort of stuff. You can do that. But this was her words to me just a couple of days ago. I said, like, how do you like Enti? She's like, it just works. Right? In comparison to the other things. And like, we've talked about all of the trouble that I've had fighting with iOS, right? There's always between Audio Bookshelf, Nextcloud, PhotoSync, you know, I could probably run down a half a dozen or more things that it has failed at. And her words to me were, Enti-Sync is so fast that I actually open up the app to delete photos from Enti, because what she used to do is she used to take a picture and she had plenty of time, and then she decided she didn't want to keep it, and so she would delete it before it got uploaded. Enti is so fast on the syncing for her that she takes the picture and immediately opens Enti if she wants to purge the pictures, because she knows it's already been synced. Like, that's how fast it works for her. And I can't say why Image wasn't doing that, other than I imagine it's something to do with iOS and the way that the application in iOS works.
Interesting. Well, so is there a final, like, a point where you're like, all right, we've hit the point where now it's going to be X, or it has been X, or like, is there a point where you essentially get rid of Image because it's not the contender, it's not the winner?
So I may maintain it for a little while longer for searching functionality, because it's nice to be able to search in different ways. They both function, like, the search in both of them is better or worse depending on various things. Like, sometimes the search on Enti just like blows me away, and other times the search on Image is much better. So I mean, the jury's out on that, but I can tell you in terms of like the thing that she's reaching for is definitely Enti.
Well, for the second time today, I will reiterate that if that's the boat that you find the users getting in, your best bet is to go support them in their endeavors to get into that boat.
Absolutely.
My approach. 1-855-450-NOAH, 855-450-6624, the email live@asknoahshow.com. So here's where I get into a little bit of skepticism into approaching everything. So the back conversation that you referenced took place in your kitchen, I sitting to your immediate right, you sitting to my immediate left, and essentially you opened the conversation by saying, Noah, what do you host in your home lab? And when I got through the embarrassingly small list of things that I host in my home lab as compared to you, that led into a discussion of, okay, well, why is there a difference here? And I think the answer that we kind of landed on is there's very much an element of the shoemaker's kids has no shoes in my house, right? The last thing I feel like doing after I spend all day, if for one organization or another, fixing technical problems, is to walk through my front door and hear, hey, we have a technical problem. And never was that more clear, or the reminder, I guess, of that for me is I have a printer that I've intentionally left sitting on top of our old printer. It's very Archie Bunker style. And the reason that it's there is to remind me that I had a printer break And I was so exhausted from fixing stuff all day long that I just went and bought another printer and set it down. And I have been reminded of that. I like the old printer better. I think the old printer could have been fixed. The old printer did things that the new printer doesn't. So there's like a million reasons of why I should have done the right thing. And it was a harder row to hoe, so to speak, but I think would have netted me a better end result. And I chose not to do that. I chose to replace it. And that was my signal to myself that, hey, I'm not up for maintaining this stuff long term. There's a very minimal amount of things. And so I've just reduced the level of stuff. I play with stuff. I spin it up. I try it. There are absolutely things like Volumio that started as oh, this could be interesting, and then now I can't imagine life without it. There are absolutely things like Home Assistant that I was going to add into home automation and now has become the center, the core, the thing that I couldn't live without. So that those kind of things do happen, and when those happen, they get, I guess, absorbed into the boat of, hey, this thing has to work. But largely, I have, to the extent that possible, or to the extent that I can, I'll play with things, I'll try things, but I have learned to try to not to rely on them, because if they go down, when they go down, I guess is a better way to say that, it doesn't create an immediate problem. It's just, there's a toy that isn't working. You ran into that this week with Frigate. It wasn't Frigate's fault, but tell me what happened to Frigate.
Yeah, so pardon me. I really, really like Frigate, and it has become a thing that we rely on for going back into history a couple of days. It's not where we store our long-term video, right? So the cameras all do their own tracking and they save to themselves, and then they upload to a different spot on the server. And so that's really the source of truth, because Frigate can go offline. As long as the cameras are functioning, they'll capture what they need to capture. What we really like for Frigate is, first of all, the web UI has been getting better and better. I don't know if you remember when we first started looking at it, you and I at Self a couple of years ago. Mm-hmm. I was only so on the user interface, and they've definitely made some good polish there.
I think more accurately, the user interface was only so, and you noticed.
Perhaps.
They didn't have a search functionality, if I remember right.
There was some rough edges. You know what? Not to cast shade, you have to make your choices when you're making a project as to where you're going to try and spend your time.
Sure.
At any rate, much better now. But is it a toy? It's not a toy, but it's also not critical to the functionality of security, because Home Assistant is still talking to the cameras and all of the things, right? That's still not much of an issue. However, I run my hard drives until they die. That's where the root of this story comes in. I have a 4 terabyte it's full of holes now, literally. 4 terabyte Seagate NAS drive that was handling all of the data for Frigate. And because I'm smart, I also had my configuration on the same drive, because it was just the Frigate drive, and it died. Mm-hmm. And I went, oh man, I don't have any idea where that, I couldn't find a backup of my configuration files, plural. And I didn't really want to go through the hassle of trying to figure out how to set this up again, because I'm sure it's gotten easier. I legitimately mean that. But Noah, do you remember, we were at it for hours sitting at Self when we first did it, right?
And part of it was we were learning, in Frigate's defense, part of us was us learning Frigate, but legitimately part of it was if I remember right, there were entire things that was copy this configuration file, copy this body of text and paste it into the configuration file, replacing the variables with your things or whatever. And then it was things like stream URL. Well, we had a camera that we'd never worked with. It was literally a camera that was being used at Self for the presenter thing, and we just hijacked it. And then so we had a camera so it's we're dealing with things like, how do we get into this camera? What is the stream URL for this random camera that we've never worked with? So there was some of that working around, but also there was also again, this is 3 years now, but we were trying to translate into, so what exactly do I paste into this configuration file and how?
Mm-hmm. And you remember there was a couple of listeners that stopped by the booth, because we're doing this at the Ask Noah booth, and they all sat down. And one of the things that was really confusing at the time was there was competing documentation on the same website. Yes. And so you'd go to one section and it would say it just was an organizational problem ultimately, but it took like 3 of us sitting down and reading different sections and trying to piece it together. Anyways, I didn't want to go through that again. So Frigate just stayed down. Now, a couple of weeks ago, if you recall, we talked about extracting data off of drives or using USB drives and stuff like that. And in the post show, which anybody is welcome to come and hang out in our Mumble Room, one of the producers was giving advice to me about what I should be looking for an external USB to actually, at the time, NVMe. Mm-hmm. And the one that he and I were looking at also had a SATA adapter as well. So even though I had tried this, like, it was dead as far as the computer was concerned. Like, every time that I would try and even plug the power into it, it would spin several hundred errors in ZFS and just get suspended right away. Mm-hmm. And I moved it to different computers, didn't work. Anyways, plugged it into this adapter, was able to extract my config off there. And I did the right thing, Noah. You know what I did?
What's that?
Well, see, I was trying to think, well, what do I do? I obviously need to replace this hard drive. I looked at the power on hours, and it was like in the vicinity of like 80 to 100,000 power on hours.
Okay.
A lot of power on hours.
Yes.
And it was dead, right? And I just ran that thing right into the ground. And so when I started looking at, well, what should I do to replace it? Well, I don't need that much space for 6 cameras because of the way that I've got the retention policy. So I don't need like an 8 or a 10 or a 12 terabyte drive. I also didn't want to buy an SSD because SSDs would just get burned out with the amount of writing that you would do to them, constantly streaming data to it. So instead, I looked around all of my Z pools and found one that had a disk that only had 3.5 years worth of power on hours. And I decided to upgrade that one. So that pool grew because I have some spare hard drives on the shelf that are cold for this reason. And I pulled this 3 terabyte drive with 3.5 years worth of power on hours. And that's now my Frigate drive.
What? So you took a drive that's 3.5 years. And
of power on hours, not just 3.5 years.
Right. And you placed it into a box to replace a drive that died and caused you a headache.
Yep. That was absolutely the right thing to do.
Yes, 100%. So if you can, because I do think there is value in this, in your answer to this question, why do you run drives into the ground? And if I can prompt you just a little bit, what does it say about your backup strategy and what does it say about your overall architecture that you're comfortable saying, I'm going to intentionally run these drives into the ground because it's not going to kill me?
So first of all, everything gets run in mirrors. I know. People are like, well, if you were running in mirror, then you wouldn't have had this problem. See, I was running this in a mirror. I can actually show you the screen prints of me saying this was in a mirror and one of them was already faulted. So first of all, I run things in a mirror. I also take snapshots and I replicate the snapshots. However, because this is transient data, I didn't care to replicate the snapshots anywhere. So when the pool died, right, I knew that I had a dead drive. I didn't care, right, because it's transient data. It lives 2 to 5 days depending on the camera because we have a completely different flow for the stuff that I actually care about, which lives months. Mm-hmm. Right. So my mistake here was co-locating the actual config with where the video stuff is stored. I have rectified that. I've also copied my config out and made sure that I backed that up because ultimately that was the biggest headache.
So what am I remembering right that there's a part of the story where one of the drives got pulled at the wrong potential time? Like there was a drive in there and we did have some redundancy, but that went away because we needed it somewhere else?
It was, I needed more storage. So this is my AMD Epic server that I use for all of my virtualization. Well, not all, most of my virtualization. And so because of that, I needed to throw more fast disks at it and I ran out of space. So I looked at it and went, well, I could have redundant disks or I could just remove one of them and then shove 2 SSDs in the same slot that I had this one 3.5 inch drive in there. So that's what I did. If you look at it, that 3.5 inch bay that was holding the spare drive now has 4 SSDs crammed in it.
How long do you anticipate this is going to last before it falls over, and or when is the best time for you, do you find, to buy drives or to replace them?
So I normally keep an eye out for drives just as a general rule. So if like right now, since I've used one of my spares off the shelf, I will start actively looking now for another drive. That's how I end up increasing my drive pools accidentally, because I won't buy. So now my smallest pool is 8 terabytes. I won't buy an 8 terabyte drive. I will buy 10 or greater at what is a reasonable price, because I currently still have 3 brand new cold spare drives. If I had to in an emergency, I could take my 12 terabyte drive and toss it at the 8 terabyte Z pool. So I basically just scan every so often for deals every couple of months, basically.
When if and when there's a new great deal on a drive, is that something you'd ever bring to the show and share the wealth, so the rest of us that don't keep a close finger on the pulse of what's going on with hard drives can mooch off of your?
I definitely would be willing to do that. Sometimes I catch it late. Like I usually ping you and it's like, hey, I just brought like those MDD drives that I picked up for really cheap last year, but it was only 2 days left in the sale when I found them. So some of it's a bit of timing.
Yeah, 100%. So Frigate is back up and running. Frigate is back, is going to remain in the Ovens household, so to speak.
Absolutely. They made one tiny change that I understand why they did it, but I find it kind of annoying. In upgrading the drive, I also pulled the latest version down, and they now do what's called smart streaming. So it used to be like I have a dashboard set up for like one button click and it shows you the chicken coop and all of its cameras, whatever. And it would just show all of them live. Now they do smart streaming, which means that they actually have to detect movement before they'll actually show you live picture, which I kind of find annoying, but I guess I get it because they're trying to be more resource sensitive.
Sure. I don't know how I feel about that. The more I'm thinking about it.
Yeah, you could go in there and turn up all of the sensitivity. That is an option, so that it thinks everything is movement. So for example, in my cameras, Frigate will actually detect the date timestamp rolling over per second as movement. So it would literally be thinking there's movement all the time.
So here would be an interesting experiment for you to try. If you have any access cameras laying around still, or if they all died on you, I'd maybe donate one to your cause. But here's what I'd be interested to know. I'd be interested to learn, can Frigate be triggered by the onboard motion detection? So with some cameras will do their own motion detection, and the advantage of that is twofold. As it relates to what you just said, it would get around the like, hey, the date moved and so that's movement or whatever, because it will know the difference between it overlaying a date and something actually changing pixels or whatever. But the second thing is, you'll never hit this in a house, I don't think. I shouldn't say never, but it would be unlikely for you to hit this in the house, but you absolutely hit it inside of like daycares and stuff where everything has to be on camera. You run out of processing power. And so you run out of ability to do motion detection because the main unit gets so bogged down with having to do motion detection once you get past, 50, 60 cameras or whatever. So being able to offload that to the camera, there can be some real advantage in that. But I'd be interested to see if it integrates with that or is able to detect that.
Yes. Well, okay. The answer to that is I have written a program to do that. So I use Home Assistant as the coordinator. And so inside of Frigate, they have this in the main dashboard, they will put little GIFs of like 5 seconds of a motion captured event, right? And then along the top, you can see that, as well as when you're going to individual cameras, in red, it will highlight sections of the timeline where there's actual motion.
Okay.
You follow me so far?
Yep.
Now, the problem is that both of those things become absolutely useless if I turned up the sensitivity to always be triggering for, hey, like the timestamp is triggering it, right? You follow me?
I do.
So that those timelines and those little snippets are absolute garbage. So instead, what I have happening is Home Assistant is actually because of the RealLink integration between Home Assistant and RealLink, it actually knows when RealLink has actually triggered a motion event. When Home Assistant captures that, then I have a program that actually pings Frigate and says, you have an event that starts now. And as soon as the camera stops the event, the same program picks up and says, okay, the event has ended. So that I get that in the timeline and I get those little GIFs and stuff like that.
Interesting. So the API call is being recognized by Home Assistant rather than Frigate directly.
Correct.
Does Frigate have the ability to read those directly and you just choose not to use it, or does it not do that, and so hence the Home Assistant / little program workaround?
As far as I know, Frigate is unaware of the types of cameras and therefore the APIs that those cameras have.
Okay.
Because they're just being inputted as RTSP streams.
Yep. It'll be, it's interesting. I do think that the motion trigger is an ONVIF thing. So presumably there is an open standards way for that to be a thing. It would just have to get implemented.
I have no idea. Like I said, right now, I don't know that that Frigate is actually aware of any of the cameras. It would add a significant amount of complexity to the code, I would imagine, to be able to know what type of cameras you have and how to connect to them and that sort of stuff.
100%.
From the Linux Newswire newsroom, this is the Week in Review with JT.
For the week of January 4th, 2026, here's the Linux and open source news. Shotcut 25.12 is now available. Ncurses 6.6 is out. OpenTTD 15.0 is now available. The teleprompter application QPrompt has released version 2.0. MKV Toolnix 97 is out. The Provoxy team has announced the release of version 4.1. OpenBGPD 9.0 has been released. And IceWM has announced the release of version 4.0. In distro news, Devuan 6.1 has been released, and Manjaro 26.0 is also out. And lastly, in open source AI news, Alibaba's AI Lab has released their newest version of the Qwen text-to-image models.
Our first email comes in from Pete. Pete writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. Long-time listener since episode 1, but this is my first question sent in." You know what we should do, Steve? We should almost have what we should do in 2026. In fact, I feel like we were on the show, so I think we can make this executive decision. I think the first time somebody writes in, if they say this is the first time, and we're just going to go on the honor system, they tell us in 2026, this is the first time I've written in, I say we put these people's name into a hat, and then at the end of the year, we draw somebody out of that hat. If they've never written into the show and they've been listening to us and they write in, we draw out of the hat and send them a Christmas present or something. What do you think of that idea?
That sounds delightful. I like it.
All right. So, Pete, you're the first one to be entered in the new contest that started 11 seconds ago. Longtime listener, but this is my first question sent in. I've been running Arch for about a year now, and I absolutely love it. I don't miss Windows at all. I run Arch, by the way. He didn't say that. I added that in. If you had a choice between a piece of software being available in both FlatHub and the AUR, which would you use to install the software? I've gone mostly with Flatpaks as I like the sandbox nature of them, but just wondering what you guys choose. Thanks for the great weekly content, Pete. So, Steve, I'm guessing you have thoughts.
Well, I use both, but I tend to lean towards the package software. I came about this decision after really struggling with Flatpak myself. And I want to emphasize this is myself, not an issue with Flatpak, but largely my issues stem from the fact that my operating system doesn't upgrade Flatpak by default. So my muscle memory never built up the ability for me to make sure they're always updated. Why this is a problem is because running a video card that has external drivers, tonight I went to use my 3D printer and I went to launch the program and it wouldn't launch. And it took me about 5 minutes of troubleshooting to realize Flatpak had to go and update all the NVIDIA drivers just to be able to launch this program. And I have a very slow connection to FlatHub where I am for some reason. Even though I have gigabit internet, my my Flatpak connection is really slow. So that meant that it took forever for the updates to run down relative to my package manager, and I just ran out of time to do the thing. So for that reason, I've had a few other problems with Flatpaks in the past. I've just found that the package software for me has worked better in a distribution that doesn't wrap them up in an automated update tool.
And so you have moved away from Flatpaks over time. Is that accurate?
In general, yeah. In an operating system like Arch that can use both of them together, I've moved away from Flatpaks. I still really like them for Endless OS because they've been wrapped up in that operating system upgrade tool. Mm-hmm. But between my wife and I, if the tool doesn't pop up and say, hey, update the Flatpaks, I completely forget about it, right? And so there's just is 100% a me thing, and I'm not going to train my wife to do this. Like, it has to be for her. She knows how to install packages from the command line. She just doesn't run her updates that way. If she doesn't get a pop-up that says, hey, run your updates, she doesn't run the updates.
Huh. So I guess here's the whole idea behind Flatpaks and why we like them to begin with. Man, both of you and I are struggling this week with keeping our throats clear. The whole idea was that the software vendor can send the update and then it is available. The user doesn't really have to think about it, and it's going to streamline, and it's going to be a main way for people to be able to install Linux apps. Sounds like that hasn't been your experience.
Again, it's a me thing, though. I want to stress that, right? I never learned to use the Flatpak system by muscle memory, right? If it was built into things, or that's the only way, because on something like Endless OS, that is the only way, it's fine. It's when there's that duality that there's a problem, because I run the updates and maybe pull down a new driver for the graphics card, and I don't think about updating the Flatpak. And so it's not a problem with the Flatpak, it's a problem with the end user not using it correctly.
If they ran the updates, the Flatpak itself would be fine.
Largely, yeah. I've had a couple of individual problems. I had a problem with Make MKV Flatpak, specifically on one specific Blu-ray drive. So I've had little intermittent things where the Flatpak didn't end up working for me and I had to bail out. I don't know what I would have done if I only had Flatpaks in those cases, but for the most part, I haven't had a problem running the software in Flatpaks. It's been just a me problem. That's what it boils down to.
So I'm going to run something past you. You tell me what you think of this, Steve. As much as I like the idea of having one way to ship software, one way to install things, as much as I like the idea of having a software repository, and really where that comes home to roost is when I'm introducing new users to Linux. The amount of, and I'm happy to say, right now, Mac OS and Windows are catching up, but it's been like this for long enough that it was a thing for the last, probably 10 years or plus. I've been able to go to users and say, when you want to install something, you just go to the App Store like you would on your mobile device, and you will find the app that you're looking for. The advantage that Flatpak brought to the party was they made native integrations with all of the existing app stores. So the instructions that I gave people 10 years ago on how to find apps, all of a sudden, Spotify and all of these various applications that are maybe proprietary in nature and ordinarily wouldn't have been able to be published are all of a sudden available to these people. And so to a degree, I really like it from that standpoint. That said, there have been enough rough edges, and like Steve, I'd be the first to admit, I understand that this is user error, that there are ways. The first thing I get from the technical people in my life when I talk about these things is, well, yeah, there's a way to exempt that. Well, yeah, there's a way to work around that. Well, yeah, there's a way to change that. And I understand all of that. But in the end, when I go to the App Store and I click on install and it installs and then I open it and it doesn't work, regardless of why that is, it's a problem and it's going to be unusable for a certain segment of people. And so because of that, I would have issues where, for example, it couldn't see the directories, right? And so I would go to open, VS Codium was like this for a while. I don't know if it still is, but I would open VS Codium and I wasn't able to see all of the directories that I needed to see, or couldn't access the device I needed to access. And so eventually got to the point where I just went back to, you know what, if I install it in the AOR, it's going to work. If it doesn't work, give it a day or two, then install it, and then it will work. And worst case scenario, the farthest I've ever really had to go is I have to go to the AOR sometimes, and there'll be a post and it'll say, well, this broke because, and then some nerd will have the answer as to why it broke and what to do about it, and they'll have a workaround, and then you use that until it gets fixed. But not until the only time that has run out of steam, or where I've run into a brick road with that, is when software becomes not developed anymore. In which case, my experience has taught me that it's going to stop working elsewhere anyway. So even if it works on Ubuntu for a while, even if it works, it's going to stop working on Arch first, but then it's going to eventually fall off the planet on all of the distros. You just get to be first to the party and find out about it, and then you can plan accordingly. So for all of those reasons, if it's in the AUR, I just don't fight it. Now, more and more often, you're finding things that aren't available any other way than Flatpaks or app images. In those circumstances, I use whatever they give me. And I will tell you this, too. For all of the different, like, do we like snaps? Do we like Flatpaks? Do we like app images? The thing that I really, really dig about app images are you can throw them all into a folder and put them all on a flash drive, and it doesn't matter if you're on Tails or Ubuntu or Fedora or Arch or Hannah Montana Linux. You double-click on the thing, and it's going to open up and it's going to run, and there's just something simple and cool about that, and I like it.
You know what? I'm a pretty big fan of app image as well. The challenge has always been integrating it with the desktop icons.
Yes. Gear lover.
Now there are external helper programs for that. But on the idea of AUR, one of the things I will do is oftentimes there will be an app image version of the thing in the AUR, and I'll pick that one. So it's still being updated by the package manager itself, but it's just pulling down the app image and putting it in a place where it's going to run it.
1-855-450 Noah. That's 855-450-6624. The email live at asknoahshow.com. Our second email comes in from Dominic. Dominic writes in and says, "Hi Noah and Steve. I enjoyed your recent comments on reproducible Linux desktops with Ansible and running Tails from a USB. I've got scripts for rebuilding my XRDP terminal server setup, and so desktops are manageable for me. My real pain point is my Graphene OS smartphone. Changing devices every 4 years means reinstalling apps and wrestling with app settings and data, which Android backups don't handle well. File sync is fine via sync thing, but I rely on each app's proprietary import-export feasibility for planned swaps. And risky if the phone is lost or damaged. Do you have any better strategies for Graphene OS backup or restores? How do you handle phone data migration? Thanks, and keep up the great show. Greetings from Germany, Dominic." So, Steve, both you and I are using Graphene OS. Do you mind if I ask what your backup strategy has been?
Throw it in the toilet. No, I don't have one because I don't care. So I legitimately don't care about, after I ended up moving to NT-Auth, where I have my 2FA everywhere I need it, I legitimately don't care. Everything else can be reinstalled because I don't use it anyway. So
I'm in the middle of you and Dominic. I am not to the point that I don't. Well, am I? Now that I'm saying that, I'm second guessing myself. For the purpose of Dominic's email, I'm going to say I'm in between you and Dominic. It's not that I don't care, but I also have a plan to come back from scratch. Like, I have to accept the fact that my phone may wind up inside of a river someday, or otherwise meet an early demise, in which case I would like a plan. Now, since reinstalling, or since switching to Graphene OS, first of all, I don't think either of us have been on Graphene OS all that terribly long. I think I'm about a year. I'll be a year in March, full-time, all devices I own, and I think you have me beat by about 6 months. Does that sound accurate to you?
yeah, somewhere in that vicinity. I might be 2 years. I went this way as soon as, so Red Hat gives us a budget every 2 to 3 years, depending on your manager, for a new phone. And so it would have been the last time I got a new phone that I just switched over.
So one of the things I care about the most is contacts, especially dipping my feet into talk radio. The Rolodex is everything. The Rolodex is everything. And so having contacts and being able to get a hold of people when you need them and knowing who, who to text or who to call, that has become, I cannot describe how important that is. And the other thing is there's some sensitive information that goes along with that. There's certain people, given their position or given their role, they don't want their phone number all over the place. And so it's a balance between, you definitely don't want to be the cause of that getting leaked, and at the same time you want access to it. You don't want to lose it because it might be difficult to track down. So I have been using Fossify contacts, and I really like it. And but the thing is, it's not tied to any particular account. So there is no backup. And so the way that I have chosen to go about doing backups is I go into the settings and I export a VCF file. So it's kind of what you're talking about, Dominic, in which every app has its own little export settings. Past that, the vast majority of the apps, and I'm just doing a double check here, it's things like my Matrix account, it's things like my XMPP account, it's things like Nextcloud, it's things like Planning Center for churches, it's things like Beeper and Signal and Mastodon and 3CX. All of those are things that I have to sign in, so it'll be a pain. But none of the data is particularly local. So I'm using Image to back up my images. I talked about how I'm manually exporting contacts, and those are the two big things I need off of the phone itself. One thing I haven't tried, but I know exists, if you go into the settings in Graphene OS and you scroll down to where it says backup, it will prompt you to say, do you want to restore your device from an existing backup or start a new backup? If you click new, start anew, it will give you a 12-word passphrase. Now, again, I cannot emphasize enough that I have not tried this. So do not rely on this. Go and dry run this and make sure no one knows what he's talking about before you do this. But when you run the backup, I wonder if when you go to restore a device on other Android devices, it's doing it through Google, but it brings back all the apps that are there, all the settings, all of the things that were inside of those apps. I wonder if this is not doing a similar thing where it's taking like an image of the phone and trying it. But again, that's no pondering out loud. I am not directly saying, hey, this is the answer to your problem. But that might be something to try. Now, Text Messenger is saying that... I'm sorry, not text message. We're getting a note in the production chat saying that they want to back up the app settings. So again, your mileage may vary. What all this backs up, does it just back up the apps? Does it back up the settings too? Does it back up the data that goes with it? Will they be signed in? Will they be signed out? Those are all things to test and then report back at live@asknoahshow.com to let us know what works, what doesn't work. But I would tell you if... in the same way that I would tell somebody who you walk into a business, that happens frequently. We don't touch that box. Why? Don't know. But if you touch the box, this thing stops working and that thing stops working. Who set the box up? Don't know. What's it running? Don't know. How do you log into it? Don't know. What happens if the box dies? Don't know. Okay, great, awesome. That's the walking definition of a widget, and you should want to avoid widgets. And so if I'm picking that example up and plopping it down into the mobile sphere, then we should have a way to reproduce the phone's environment. And if the phone's environment means that you have a very tedious process of going into all of these apps and exporting all of that data, that's a problem because you're not doing it on a regular basis anyway. And so if you're walking along the street and somebody swipes it out of your hand, you're in a bad way. And so probably think about some different ways to do that. But to recap, anything that is random data is Nextcloud gets it off the phone, Image gets photos off the phone, and I manually do contacts. And Steve doesn't care. He's prepared for his phone to stop working. He didn't really like it to begin with. And so
my contacts sync to Nextcloud. So I suppose in that regard, but that my phone is like you and your laptop, like Tails, right? It's kind of transient. Nothing on the phone. I'm just looking at my app list. Yeah, everything either syncs down or I don't care. So
Atypical posted inside of our production doc that you may want to try ADB. Well, it'll allow you to back up and restore data or apps and their data. And he links to Droidwin that talks about how to create and restore a backup via ADB. I'm gonna make a prediction. I'm gonna make a prediction that this is under the hood. This is doing the same thing that the Android built-in utility for backup and restore is doing. I'm guessing it's taking an image of the way that everything is installed and giving it to you as a file that you can then move off and restore to a new device. I may actually have the ability to try this. I'll have to see. For a while I had we'll have to see. If I can find myself access to another Pixel 6 that I can use, I will try to restore my phone and we'll see what and how well that works. And if you try it before we do, then please write in, or if you happen to know, please write in live@asknoahshow.com. Jeremy writes in and says, "Hi, Noah and Steve. I'm wondering if there's a recommendation you would have for an HDMI switch between desktop and laptop. The ones I see online seem to be very expensive or have very poor reviews. Thanks, Jeremy." Steve, have you ever used an HDMI switch or a KVM switch?
I have back in the day. I don't have much need of the physical ones anymore because I use some sort of remote software to do that. I either use something like Barrier, that is just a software that allows you to use the same keyboard and mouse across multiple computers, or my new favorite tool is Rustdesk for remotely accessing things. So I don't really have much need for a physical switch.
Tell me about Barrier. I'm not aware of that, or I don't think I've heard of that.
So Barrier is a fork of, what was it called? I can't remember, but there's several of these type of softwares that essentially you have an agent running on each computer, and you set up grids or hot zones or whatever on your screens, so that it knows when I mouse over in this spot, I should move over into the next computer screen. And so if you've got your laptop sitting here, I use that pretty frequently. On my laptops always go on my far left. Mm-hmm. So if I scroll over to the far left side, it will move my mouse cursor, or it looks like it moves the mouse cursor, but all it does is transfers the control of the keyboard and mouse from my computer to the laptop. And then same thing, if I scrolled all the way back to the right, it would just move over. So there's been several permutations of things like Barrier that I have used for quite a long time. Trying to remember what the...
So while you're looking, I want to talk a little bit about Synergy. It kind of does a similar thing. So far as I understand, it is an open source thing, or at least they have a GitHub with a GPL3 license on it. But kind of the same thing. You install the application on two different computers, and then you're able to use one keyboard and mouse to jump between them. Now, I will tell you a couple of things. By way of reliability or trust, I have an environment in which Synergy is running on two different machines across on two different VLANs, and it still works without fail. So even crossing a layer 3 device, you would not know that keyboard and mouse is not connected to the same computer. So from that standpoint, I think it's incredibly reliable, incredibly trustworthy. I wouldn't worry about it at all. The downside is I am not a huge fan of software solutions for stuff like this. Let me rephrase. I am not a fan of software solutions when they're critical. If it's something that, like, I think in your environment or in your boat, it's a function of all the computers are physically there. So if like Rustdesk if you ever ran into a real problem, you could always spin around, grab the computer that you're controlling and open it up and use it, right? Mm-hmm. So if that's the case, or if you have a keyboard and mouse handy that you can just plug in, or in case anything ever went down, again, can't emphasize this enough, not that it ever has, but be prepared for that. I think that's fine. I do not have enough good things to say about IO gear. I have tried every KVM under the sun, from the really expensive multi-$1,000 ones to the really cheap throw under your desk ones. And what I have found is IO gear is the best of both worlds. They make an entry-level KVM that is like a little 2 USB mouse thing for like $85. They have a huge 8-port one, the GCS 1108, which is the KVM that sits under my desk at home, and I have one keyboard, one mouse, one monitor. That is the KVM keyboard mouse monitor, and so as I have my laptop dock, that's it, one input. I've got my desktop, that's another input. And so depending on what I'm doing, I just switch over to it. It does all the things that you would expect from a KVM by way of you can use a double hotkey to switch between the systems and scroll to them. But it is so helpful by way of, hey, it's not uncommon, and Steve, I'm sure you've dealt with this. the client makes you take a specific computer. They're going to ship you a computer or a laptop or a thing. And so being able to just take that and, okay, fine, you're just another input on my thing. And same keyboard, same mouse that I'm using, and I can swap between, my machine and that one. The only thing I have found that is not 100% ideal is you would need to spend significantly more money to get one that switches multiple monitors at a time. And so as I'm moving towards, this kind of went away as I went to ultrawides, but back when I had multiple monitors and I was trying to manage this, it was kind of a pain because one of the monitors was tied to the KVM and the other wasn't. And so sometimes that was helpful because I could put like a reference on one machine and have it up and running on one machine. Then I could switch to another and do some work. But largely, it just felt very disjointed. Again, problems kind of since went away since I've switched to a single larger monitor instead of multiple small ones. But I don't have enough good things to say about IO Gear. Works natively with Linux. They have different adapters to go from KVM or DVI depending on what you need. I think they're cost effective compared to what you're getting in other places. So IO Gear. If you're looking for a hardware KVM, I cannot recommend them enough. I love them. I will purchase no other KVM for the rest of my life, if only out of sheer loyalty to a company that served me well for going on 20 years.
So just to circle back, Barrier is a fork of Synergy 1.9 before Synergy changed its license to be commercially adapted.
They did change it, huh?
They did. Having said that, I own a Synergy license and have used it even recently, but I just discovered that there's a project called DeskFlow, and DeskFlow is actually sponsored by Synergy.
Huh.
So we'll put a link in the show notes for that, but they provide code and financial support to DeskFlow, and so I suppose this is their upstream if I was to hazard a guess.
Would you ever see yourself going back to that sort of solution, or is it more like I'll just run it on different things and then rust desk in? Because the kind of nice thing about your approach, Steve, instead of having to like gang things together, every computer just essentially becomes an application to you, which is kind of nice.
It is. It's nice for a couple of reasons, like taking screenshots, for example. That becomes really, really handy for me. I don't know how many times I do that, where I fire up Rust desk to a thing and take a screenshot of, like, I Rust desk to a machine that has access to a client environment, for example.
Mm-hmm. You know what? One thing I've never seen before until 5 seconds ago when we were having this discussion, and now I found out that this thing exists, and I'm totally going to impulse buy one of these, and I'll have to explain it to my wife, but I think the juice is worth the squeeze. IO Gear makes what they call the Access Pro Plus, which is a 2-port USB-C KVM Thunderbolt switch. So you can plug 2 Thunderbolt computers into this bad mamma jamma, and then you can switch between those. And I feel like I need some of that in my life.
I don't have anything with Thunderbolt that I'm aware of, but you have fun.
Yeah, I think I need this in my life. I absolutely do. In fact, I think I'm going to have to order this right now. And then I'm going to have to find a way to justify spending $129.99 plus tax and shipping. That's a necessity. I just had that realization while finishing up this episode. You know what that music means? That means we're out of time, but I thank you for joining us. We're here every Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central. Catch the show live or the reruns at podcast.asknoahshow.com. We're back next Tuesday, 6 p.m. Central, asknoahshow.com.